Hi. I'm Jill. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is November 13th, 2011. And that sounds like a long time to some of you. But I have a sponsor who's got like 27 years. I remember she got her 37, I mean. And I remember, so that's part of my story. So I remember shortly after I came into the rooms, and I hadn't asked her to be my sponsor yet. She'd told me she would be, but I had not called her. She got a 25-year chip, and it freaking blew my mind. I did not know that was possible. I didn't know anybody had that much. And then her sponsor got like 50 years. So being around old timers made me realize that it was possible. So just like anybody else, once upon a time, my story began. I don't believe I was born an alcoholic. I think I worked very hard to become one. But I do find that I do a lot of things alcoholically. I did not come from my parents weren't drinkers. I didn't suffer from a lot of the religious trauma that most people in this state do because I wasn't brought up in this state. I was brought up LDS, but I actually had the opposite issue. I was not allowed to have friends come over. My friends were not allowed to come over because their parents did not want them to be around the bad environment of Mormons. And I just thought, oh well. I grew up in Berkeley, California. So it wasn't just the Mormon religion that they weren't partial to. They weren't partial to most religions. And I grew up in the 60s in Berkeley. So it was an entertaining childhood. I think a lot of my issues came from I thought I could fix everything. And I thought if everybody would do the things that I wanted them to do, that my life would be better, but their life would be better too. When I was 11 years old, my oldest sister was in a car accident, and she had 2 children, and she was left brain dead. Her heart beat on its own. Her lungs worked on their own. There was no plug to pull, but she had no thinking process. And my mother would sit in the hospital all day with her. My brother-in-law and my dad would go to the hospital all night. And as soon as I got home from school, it was my job to take care of her children, which I loved. But that's where it begins, you know. I could get them to do what I wanted. I had to take care of everybody, I thought. And then 4 years later, when I was 15, my father died. And my sister finally did pass away shortly thereafter. And because I was worried that my mother was going to have a nervous breakdown, because I don't know many women who can lose a child and a husband in the 6-month period. And she was left with 2 teenagers, a 14 and a 15-year-old. And then my older sister was suffering from addiction, so she was afraid she was going to die at any minute. I thought I had to take care of my mother too. I made sure that any natural teenage activity I had, I certainly kept that hidden because I didn't want to add to her stress. And then my brother-in-law remarried and took those 2 little girls that I was the mother of, I felt, and they moved. And of course he didn't do anything wrong, but I felt really abandoned. And then after my dad died, my mother moved up here to Utah. Hey, if you don't want to know about culture shock, do not move from Berkeley, California in the 70s to Spanish Fork, Utah in the 70s. I am telling you, that was the biggest shock. And then strange enough, I had been very active in the church in California, and I moved here, and it was like, I guess I don't like being in the in crowd. I quit going to church because it was not the same religion I grew up in. And I have nothing against it now. It was just such a cultural difference, such a cultural difference. It took me almost 10 years probably to adjust to it. I had such a chip on my shoulder. I couldn't believe that I'd had to move here and do all this. I've certainly acclimated now. I'm fine with it. I still don't go to church. But I've found my people. And then my first experience with real alcoholism was my first husband. And I should have listened to him. I remember we were having a discussion once, and I was working really hard. I was working at the post office, and I was working 12-hour shifts, and I was working 6 days a week. And then he'd want me to stop in the bar and pick him up, and he had cancer. So that was his excuse to not work, but I remember him saying, "Oh, there's a lot of dirty dishes in the sink." And I said, "Well, I am not home to dirty them. And they're all glasses from drinking, you and your friends drinking. Maybe you should wash them." And he said to me, "I guess you think it's easy being a drunk." Yeah, I had to laugh. I was so mad at him, but I couldn't stop. The one thing he could do is make me laugh. He could make anybody laugh. And at the time, I was just pissed. I thought he was being sarcastic. But over time, like I got into the rooms kind of through the back door. When I was married to him, I went to Al-Anon. That should have been another hint, because I went to 3 or 4 meetings, and I remember getting up halfway through the meeting and saying, "Oh my God, if I was married to you people, I'd be drunk too." And I got up and walked out. That should have been a hint that maybe I was a drunk and not a codependent. But when I did start drinking and it really hit me hard, it was not easy being a drunk. And I tried to manage everything like I always had. I would get up and I would go to work and I would come home and I would try to get absolutely everything I was going to need to done before I had that first drink. Because once I had that first drink, it was all over. I was going to do nothing else but drink the rest of the night until I blacked out. And it didn't take me very long to black out, but it took me a long time after that to pass out. So who knows what I was doing? I know I don't most of the time. By this time, I was married to another man. God bless him. He's still married to me. I don't know how he made it through it. And I had a daughter that was 14 years old. And they're both part of my story. My husband used to drink with me. I thought he was an alcoholic. And I went to... And my daughter, well, something had happened to her that made it completely apparent to me that part of the reason that had happened to her is I was not present as a mother. And that had I been involved the way I used to be when she was younger, and the way I always thought I would be, and the way I was with my nieces, that there's some of that stuff she wouldn't have had to go through. Unfortunately, this is the stuff we deal with as alcoholics. We do damage other people, and God, we try to convince ourselves we're the only one we're hurting. But that was pretty much my eye-opening thing. And I ended up having to take her to a therapist. And I did have the presence of mind to tell her, whatever you say whatever you need to. Don't worry about your dad and I. This is about you. So she did. She told him, my dad yells a lot and my mother's a drunk. So she, like a good therapist, invited me and told me I needed to get help because my daughter no longer felt safe at home. That she didn't think anybody was going to hurt her, but she didn't feel protected. That got me into treatment. And she did a similar thing with my husband. Anyway, this was the beginning of the beginning. It wasn't the beginning of the end because we're still together. But I got in treatment. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I got in treatment, I thought I'm going to learn how to drink like I used to could. I'm going to be able to have a drink or two, and I'm going to be able to go home and not be drunk, not even be very tipsy, and I'm not going to have a drink for a couple of more weeks until there's, a reason to socialize. Luckily, at the same time that I did that, I started going to a Sunday AA meeting, and that had a lot of old-timers at it, and I would hear their stories, and I'm thinking, oh, they keep telling me that there's no such thing as drinking like a lady once we did it, and they'd read that how it works, and I'm like, I wish they'd quit saying that, I'm like, kept thinking, I'm going to make these guys take their hat off to me, But as a couple of weeks went by, let's face it, I didn't have a great attitude. I mean, I did want to get sober, but then I found out they were going to make me pee in a cup in front of somebody. And that really pissed me off. So you should have been there for my temper tantrum that day. And then when I finally said, okay, that's what they have to do, then they asked me what I thought of their treatment, and I told them. So they then invited me to leave. So I left. And I got in my car, and I was going to go have a drink. And this is where God did for me what I could not do for myself. I was going to the liquor store, and I thought, my husband's already tired of me being sober because he's hiding his drinking, and maybe I'm really going to be able to drink like a lady. And I sat in my car, and I'm thinking, okay, it's 6:45. The liquor store, I'm in Payson, the liquor store is open for 15 more minutes. If I hurry and get there, I can leave with a bottle. And I heard in my head this voice. I don't know whose voice it was. There is a women's meeting at 7 o'clock. And I thought, why do I know that? I hadn't been to this meeting. I had a schedule. I must have glimpsed it on the thing. Anyway, and I thought, whatever, that's crazy. And I'm going to the liquor store, and I ended up in front of that meeting, which happened to be in Springville. For some reason, in the first sober blackout I had, I drove through 3 towns and ended up in Springville at a meeting. I've never had that drink yet, but that was not me, because my intention was I was purposely going to drive to the liquor store. What I realize now is that I think the way I drank, there was no way that I could ever. I had somebody ask me today, you don't think you could ever come back even if you had one drink? And I said, I don't think I could ever have one drink, because I never was able to. Once I stepped over that line, once I had a drink, my husband, I'd come home from work and he'd say, before you have your first drink, could you do this or make this phone call? And my daughter would say, Mom, before you have anything to drink, can you take me to my friend's house? It seemed so normal then, but I look at it now and it's kind of sad, that your family has to live their life around your drinking. So that's what happened. Now, how is it now? This is, I spent 6 months going to AA meetings, hearing a lot of old timers. I went to a lot of meetings where there was a lot of sober time. And I would hear some of these people and their stories. They had such a lower bottom than I did. And yet they were like I really had them on a pedestal. That's where I got hope. You know, I got that hope from those old timers. And I'm still really grateful for that. And for 6 months, my sponsor would see me at the Sunday morning meeting and say, "Do you still have my phone number? You can call me anytime." And I'm like, "Okay, thank you, I will." And I didn't. Until about 6 months went by. And I got to the point where I was either going to have to start working steps, because they kept telling me the steps is what makes your life worth living. You know, the steps is where you start to make your life better. And I kept thinking, you know, how can that little bit of shit do all that for you, you know? I'm sober. And of course, like everybody else that comes in and actually makes a life for themselves, they find out that the alcohol is but a symptom of the problem. And we have to deal with all that crap that came before. The stuff we're trying to get away from, the stuff we're hiding from, the stuff we're climbing in the bottle to get away from. And the only way I was going to figure that out is by doing steps and trying to figure out what was really wrong with me. I have a good friend that always says her name and says, "I'm an alcoholic. My problem is me." And you know that's really the truth. So I finally called her and I said, "Okay, I think I've done step 1 and step 2. It's time for this step 3 thing, because I still to this day have a very hard time handing stuff over to God, because I'm pretty smart. And I know I say this joke a lot, because I read it in the grapevine and I love it because it's totally me. The difference between me and God is God never thought he was me. And that's true. But I started working the steps. I didn't work them fast. I worked them slow. I wrote out my 4-step 3 different times. I lost it twice. But finally, I wrote it all out, and I was able to go over that with my sponsor. One of the things I realized, now that I've worked the steps several times since, is that first time round, I was being as thorough as I possibly could, that I thought at that time. But the funny thing about this program is, like, really I got the drinking out of the way in that. And I found the really top surface of everything. But in the steps that I've done since, boy, that 6 and 7's the one that kicks my ass. That you know, finding out, you know, what my defects are and what part of everything I've done is mine, and actually trying to hand that over, you know. I still have a hard time handing that over, or keeping it handed over, because I take it back a lot. And we had a friend that used to say, if you don't turn it over and let it go, you're flying upside down. And I do a lot of upside down flying sometimes. But I went through the steps, and I had a sponsor who sponsored a lot of women, and still sponsors a lot of women. And she had a sponsor who sponsored a lot of women, but was also very into service. And so I started doing some of the service stuff because I like to control things. I think I've said that before. So I like to get in, see how this works, put in my 2 cents. And I got involved in central office at about a year sober. And I did that and was the central office chair and was a trustee and all that. And I got into general service at about 2 years sober, maybe even before. No, it was before. And I'm still involved in that. And I am like our area literature chair. That's not bragging. That's just saying when I have sponsees, I usually get them involved in service if they're willing, and sometimes they need it, so sometimes I'm a little tougher on them and say, you have to try this even if it's just for a couple of months. Because one of the things service did for me is I found a lot of talents that I did not think I had anymore. I have a lot of organizational skills. I have a lot of problem-solving skills, and not that AA has a lot of problems to solve, but when you get a lot of people up there that think they know everything, sometimes you just need somebody that says, is this going to fix the problem, or maybe if we just went home and slept on it for a while, maybe that's not the problem we think it is. So I've really enjoyed doing that. There's also some times where I've thought, if I have to go to one more of those meetings, I'm going to quit AA. Because that's just the way it is, and I'm an alcoholic. But I'm very grateful for this program because it's changed. Well, surprise, surprise, 6 years into being sober, I actually took this program home and started practicing it with my husband. Because, he'd say something and I'd argue back. Things I wouldn't really do with other people. I'd come to a meeting, I'm so nice, and I would listen to your side, and sometimes you would convince me you were right. I never gave my husband that choice. He was wrong from the get-go. And and I made sure he knew it. And then one day, about 6 years into it, I thought, I do all this stuff and I behave this way when I'm at a meeting. Maybe I need to try it with him. Maybe there'd be less tension in this house. And so he said something, and I said, well, okay, well, let's just try it that way then. And he about lost his shit. But anyway, that was kind of the beginning of a lot of turnaround, because I like to tell people this. He probably would have divorced me, but he's too lazy to pack his shit and leave. So he just stayed, hoping things would change, and eventually they did. So that's God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, too. It's probably doing for him what he couldn't do for himself, too. But in the meantime, he lost his drinking buddy, and he's sober now. I found out he really wasn't the alcoholic. It really was me the whole time. And man, I was so disappointed in myself, because I always like being the one that's better. But I'm also grateful because I've grown a lot. Okay, so what happens? If you're new, you're thinking, I'm going to get sober, everything's going to be fine, I'll work those steps, I might sponsor 1 or 2 people, then I'm out of here because I'm cured. And my problem is 12 years have gone by, and I don't think I've ever gone to less than 3 meetings in a week. Except for when I was sick with COVID. And you know what happened? 72 hours without a meeting, and I forgot I was an alcoholic. And I started thinking I could do shit. And then God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. My sponsor called and said, what the hell are you talking about? Don't you drink no matter what? And so I didn't. But I do know that I get really squirrely if I don't hit a meeting at least every 3 days. And it's a good thing. And when I get really bored, I go to a meeting. It hasn't fixed all of my personal problems, all of my defects, but it has turned, some of my defects have actually turned into assets. And as long as I work on them and keep them in check. And then the other thing I've learned, in the beginning, I had to really practice. Was it my higher power trying to guide my direction, or it was just something I wanted really bad? Did I want it bad enough that I was going to think it was my higher power telling me to do this? Because your higher power tells you to do lots of crazy things, like date that cute boy over there that's doing heroin. And I thought God wanted me to date my second husband, but actually God got me out of that one alive. And the other thing I've learned is sometimes when I think the absolute worst thing is happening to me, if I give it some time and reflect back on it, I find out it's the absolute best thing that could have ever happened. That God guy, he's kind of smart, but I am not as smart as I used to think so. And I still do childish things once in a while. About a year and a half ago, I threw a fit at work. And I was going to quit, and I was going to, And then I thought, okay, what would I do? I got to do the steps over this. I've got to do a 4th step over it. And so I did a lot of work on it. And then I thought, I've got to do a 5th step. At the time, my sponsor was going through a lot of stuff, and she was in and out of town. And I hadn't got with her yet, and one day my 5th step just came out in my boss's. I was in my boss's office, and it just came out at her. I puked the 5th step all over her. And it was like a spiritual experience. I'm like, oh, well, I think that that little situation just got better. Give it some time. Now, it didn't fix the whole situation, but it fixed my part of it. And so I gave it another year and a half. I did end up quitting just this last week, but not with the same hate, not with the same resentment, I'm not going to get drunk over it. I feel good about my decision. Because sometimes when you accept your situation and you've done all you can to make it better, sometimes you just have to remove yourself from that situation. And that's what I chose to do. And I'm not upset about that. I might be upset that there's still 20 minutes, but so that's one of the things. The other thing I want to really talk about here is the hardest thing in the world is to have a relationship where you are drinkers and then keep the same relationship when you're not drinkers. First there was just one drinker. I remember 4 months sober, my husband said, okay, don't you think this is under control? Do you think you can have a drink now? And I said, I think it's only under control because I'm not drinking at all. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to drink again. But I said, we'll see. I said, they tell me that nobody gets, if you're an alcoholic, you're just always going to be one. And I said, I don't want to start having those cravings. living your whole life by the drink. When you're drinking or thinking about drinking, there was really nothing else going on in my life. And then I remember one of the things that really helped is getting honest, and not stepping around and telling we have this issue where we try to tell our partner what they want to hear because we don't want to have a confrontation. But that living a lie, I went and got this tattooed on my arm, to thine own self be true, because that's the one thing that's saved my life. That when I start pretending I'm somebody else is when I get really crazy. My grand sponsor said, what I found out after I got sober is you can be an alcoholic and you can be crazy. They're not mutually exclusive. And I've always remembered that. You can have more than one ailment at a time. And so I still get crazy once in a while. And that's one of the reasons I always stay so involved with AA, because I can always call somebody who's been just as crazy as me. And what I've seen is, for some reason, my higher powers made sure that the women I've surrounded myself with do not all get crazy on the same day. And that saved our lives. I mean, I wish it was a joke, but it's really saved our lives. And I've been able to sponsor some women. The program, the steps really came alive for me when I was able to take my first sponsee through all 12 steps, and she to this day is still sober. She doesn't still come to meetings, but she's still sober. And she probably wasn't as crazy as me. But to really do the full 12th step, you have to sponsor someone through it. And I remember I was so scared. I was scared to death to do it. But I did. The first 3 people I sponsored didn't stay sober. And I would feel so terrible, and I'd go cry on my sponsor's shoulder, and she'd say, did you read the big book? Did you read Bill's story? Do you know how many people he sponsored them for 6 months? And one guy even killed himself in his house, and I'm like, okay, if Bill W. can do it, I can do it too. But my life has gotten a lot richer. I remember when I got sober at 53. So if you do your math, I'm 66 this month. At 53, I was disappointed when I woke up in the morning. I kept hoping that I would just go to bed drunk and not wake up. And I always woke up. And now I look back and I think, man, I could live to be 150 and not do everything I want to do. I really thought I was done. I thought, well, I've raised my kids, and I've done this, and I've supported myself, and I've done good things and I've done bad things, and so I'm ready to go. But I'm grateful that I'm still here. And if my mind stays intact, I wouldn't mind staying around another 70 years. But the rate it's going, I don't think that's happening. But I just want you to stay in the rooms for a while. Give yourself a chance. I do know if nothing changes, nothing changes. I had accepted that I was an alcoholic 2 years before I actually did anything about it. And then God forced me to believe in him by doing that frickin' miracle. But it still took a long time to do step 3. And then it took a long time to get through step 4 and 5 and 6. And 9 was the one that I dreaded, because I'm not good at being humble. It took all the humility I had just to get in these rooms, and then to have to like basically tell these people all the shitty things I'd done to them, and what could I do to fix it, you know. That was hard, but that was the stuff that stuck with me. It's also the stuff that said, boy, I don't want to go back out and have to do that again. So, because even though I still do 9th step work, it's not on all that stuff. It's like one thing at a time. There are times when I behave badly, and before it's even out of my mouth, I'm thinking, I'm going to have to make an amends over this. And I get so mad at myself because I don't like having to do it. But the only thing worse than not making amends is not making amends, because then I can't sleep. It keeps going around in my head, and if I want it to shut up, I've got to actually go take care of it. This is a program of honesty, which is foreign to the way I came into this, and now, if I'm not honest, if I'm not honest, I lose my sanity, you know. It's almost impossible for me to be dishonest. My biggest problem is learning the difference between rigorous honesty and brutal honesty. I have to be honest with myself. I don't have to tell you every little thing I'm thinking, because it may not be the best thing. And you know what? You guys really don't have to care what I think, because I don't run your life. And I would hope that I wouldn't, you know. Don't listen to me, because I screwed up my own life, so I'm going to screw up yours. If you're my sponsees, though, I tell them, I always pray when they come over, so that I have a little inspiration from their higher power, and hopefully they're working in conjunction with my higher power. And then I tell them, at least consider it. You don't have to do everything I say, but at least consider it, because it comes from somewhere and it doesn't come from here. Anyway, I hope I get at least 12 more years sober before I die, and I'm really grateful that I got to talk here. And I'm really sorry I'm stopping 12 minutes early, but I would just be meandering after this, so thanks.